Now, Police Scotland received almost 4,000 complaints within the first 2 days of their controversial new hate crime laws coming into force, of course, on April Fool's Day. And people protested against the legislation on Monday, and yes, it came in, as I said, on April the 1st, April Fool's Day. You couldn't make it up. Scotland's First Minister Humza Yousaf has said he's very proud of the country's new hate crime laws. But would you believe that people have complained to the police about him? Because it comes after this speech he made in Holyrood in June 2020.
Lord Justice Clark, white. Every High Court judge, white. The Lord Advocate, white. The Solicitor General, white. The Chief Constable, white. Every Deputy Chief Constable, white. Every Assistant Chief Constable, white. The Head of the Law Society, white. The Head of the Faculty of Advocates, white. Every Prison Governor, white. And not just Justice. The Chief Medical Officer, white. The Chief Nursing Officer, white. The Chief Veterinary Officer, white. The Chief Social Work Advisor, white. Almost every trade union in this country headed by people who are white. In the Scottish Government, every Director General is white. Every chair of every public body is white.
And I am white. So, is Humza Yousaf in trouble? Well, no, he's not. Police Scotland said it received a number of complaints, but they previously established no crime had been committed. Well, joining me now is the founder of Faircop, Harry Miller. He's a former police officer and he's white. And he once had a non-crime hate incident recorded against himself over tweets that he posted. Harry, welcome to the show. Always an absolute pleasure. The First Minister of Scotland brought in this new law, but he's got form himself of being divisive in what he says. And isn't that the way it should be? We're allowed free speech without it being policed by the government.
Absolutely. It is a thing of pure joy that this ridiculous act has come to bite him on the backside quite so quickly as it has. My understanding is that he's received far more complaints about his speech than J.K. Rowling has received, which is quite something in actual fact. But getting down to the more serious matter about this, I consider this to be a literal act of treason. A literal act of treason in that this law it seeks to undermine and get rid of all of the freedoms that have been built up in Britain, in England, over centuries and centuries and centuries. And I think the antidote is, to borrow a phrase from Trump, build a wall. What we need to do is we need to separate Scotland away from England. We need to put up a strong intellectual wall to stop this peevish nonsense from Chairman McMahon coming down and spilling down into England. And we need to do it now, Martin, because the police in Britain, there are certain police forces in Britain who are going to be absolutely loving this. Having sort of dealt them a massive blow with their non-crime hate incidents, they're now going to be thinking, fantastic, we can now employ an army of lowland snitchers to terrify the people into silence. And so we need to resist, resist, resist.
And you're the man who's no doubt going to be leading that charge. How did this ever get any legal recognition? I mean, you weren't at the Supreme Court, Royal Court of Justice, on non-crime hate incidents. I thought this kind of stuff had been quashed and had gone away.
It's supposed to have. Now, what they will argue is that the victory that I won only applies in England and Wales. Well, that's not true, because we used the ECHR. Article 10 of the ECHR was the legislation which is European-wide that we used. So it has to apply in Scotland. It has to apply in Scotland. Now, one of the things that the High Court judge said, he quoted extensively from both Orwell and J.S. Mill on liberty, if you remember. Now, one of the great things about On Liberty tells us that we must not take the knee. We have a duty not to conform, because cowing people into silence is the first thing that a tyranny tries to do. And it is up to noble men and women, honest men and women, brave men and women to stand up and saying, this far and no further, bugger off. Just get out of our lives. It is not the role of government to suppress our conversation. And it's absolutely not the role of government to suppress our conversation, even if it is ribald conversation, even if it is slightly risque conversation within the four walls of our own homes. This is tyranny, Martin, and it needs to be overthrown, and overthrown for good, and very soon.
Well, you're one of the brave men who will no doubt overthrow it. And J.K. Rowling, of course, testing the parameters of this law on day one, pushing back. And I'm all for free speech, Harry, but be careful with your words. Don't get him in trouble with Ofcom. The last thing I need. Harry Miller, thank you very much for joining me on the show.